Okay, we're going to get started. So we're here for another virtual seminar and addressing important topics in our region. I'm Sarah Johnson. I'm the past president of Western Region Economic Development. I'm joined right here by another past president, Hercules Cummings. We also have Doobie Cummings, secretary of our Red Board, with us, fielding questions that come up on the chat. We'll explain that a little bit more at the end, right before the presentation starts. But Western Region Economic Development proudly represents counties throughout Western North Dakota, including Divide, McKenzie, Mountrail, and Williams counties. Our mission is to facilitate and promote a vibrant, diversified, sustainable economy through collaboration and outreach. One of our key objectives, among a few others, is to focus on future recruitment and development, and that is a primary focus for our virtual seminar on growth and development in the Bakken today. First, I'd like to thank our sponsor for today's virtual seminar, Mountrail-Williams Electric Cooperative. With sponsors like Mountrail-Williams, we are able to share the wealth of knowledge from different industry leaders for the past few years. So we are happy to welcome two cooperative powerhouses, that pun is intended, to our virtual world here. One is Todd Brickhouse. He's the CEO and general manager of Basin Electric Power Cooperative. And the other is Alex Vournas, and he's the general manager at Mountrail-Williams Electric Cooperative. Allow me to introduce them a little bit more before we get started. So Todd Brickhouse joined Basin Electric in 2022 as its senior vice president and chief financial officer. He was named Chief Executive Officer and General Manager in December of 2023. Brickhouse leads a team of nearly 1,800 employees who work to provide value to the cooperative's membership by providing affordable and reliable power, products, and services produced in a safe and environmentally responsible manner. Basin Electric's service territory includes 3 million consumers across 9 states in the upper Midwest, Great Plains, and Rocky Mountain regions. Basin Electric's largest subsidiary, Dakota Gasification Company, operates the Great Plains Synfuels plant, a coal gasification facility which produces synthetic natural gas and 12 additional products. Dakota Gasification Company captures and sequesters approximately 2 million metric tons of carbon dioxide annually. Excuse me. Brickhouse started working in the utility industry at Old Dominion Electric Cooperative in Glen Allen, Virginia in 2000, and served as Old Dominion's vice president and treasurer from 2010 to 2022. He spent his early career in the financial services industry and has a background in securities trading, investment banking, and investment management. Brickhouse holds a bachelor's degree in economics and business from the Virginia Military Institute in Lexington. So joining him is Alex Vournas, who is a general manager at Mountrail-Williams Electric Cooperative. Alex joined Mountrail-Williams Cooperative, MWEC, in 2013, serving in various roles, most recently as Chief Operating Officer. Their board of directors selected Vournas to serve as their general manager in January of 2024. Under his leadership, Mountrail-Williams serves over 8,000 members spanning nearly 5,000 miles of distribution line throughout Williams and Mountrail counties. In 2023, WMEC sold over 5.6 billion kilowatt hours of electricity, powering homes, farms, businesses, and industries across its service area. As a member-owned electric cooperative, Mountrail-Williams purchases power from Basin Electric Power Cooperative with the goal of delivering safe and reliable and affordable power. Vournas holds a Bachelor's of Science degree in Computer Science from the University of North Dakota, which is also my alma mater. So I am proud to say that one. So let's get this started. We've got a few important notes. We do have all participants not presenting on mute for this presentation. If you do have questions, please add them to the chat of this seminar. The questions and comments area will be monitored, and your questions will be addressed either at the end of this meeting or if we run out of time, addressed to you after this seminar is finished. So we appreciate you being here, and Alex is going to start off our presentation. So Alex, take it away.
All right. Thank you for inviting us. We're excited to share with you today. In preparation for this, Todd and I visited about how we were going to do this, and we thought it made sense for me to go first and share some of what we're seeing here at Mountrail-Williams for future growth, and then set the stage for Todd to talk about what Basin's doing and their projects they have going to accommodate that type of growth. So, see here. So I want to start off by just saying, Mountrail-Williams is just one of the distribution cooperatives within the West Region Economic Development Area. To the north of us, we have Burke Divide Electric Cooperative. To the south of us, we have McKinsey Electric Cooperative, and west of us, not shown on this map, is Lower Yellowstone Rural Electric Cooperative, and they do serve the southwest corner of Williams County. So we're just one of them, but we'll tell our story today, and our neighboring cooperatives have very similar things going on in their area. So a little background on Mountrail-Williams. A little bit of it was covered, but I'll go through it quickly here. We're a member-owned, not-for-profit electric distribution cooperative. We serve Williams and Montreal counties, as our name suggests. We're headquartered in Williston, and we have offices in Stanley and Newtown. We have just over 8,500 members. We're governed by an elected board of 9 members, and we have just over 19,000 service locations or meters, 5,000 miles of distribution line, 450 miles of transmission line, and our annual peak demand is currently at 850 megawatts. So I want to describe that a little bit because I'm going to talk about that here in the next slides. So peak demand, you can think about that as the maximum amount of power that we serve at any one time. And I'm typically going to be talking about that in an annual, context. So think about it as probably likely for our utility, it's going to be one of the coldest days of the year is when we're going to hit our peak. Before I get into some of the growth here at Mountrail-Williams, I want to talk a little bit about the cooperative structure. I find that most people in this area have heard of Mountrail-Williams Electric. They've heard of Basin Electric, but often people are a little confused about how we work together and how we fit together. So I want to talk about that. And before I get into that, I have to talk a little bit about power supply. So about 1% of Mountrail-Williams' power comes from Western Area Power Administration, which they market the power from the hydroelectric dams from the Missouri River system. So that makes up about 1% of our power supply, and we're capped at that. Everything above and beyond that, we get from Basin Electric, and all future growth will be Basin Electric. So most people don't understand that, and so I wanted to cover that. But on the slide here, you can see our membership structure. I'll call it the cooperative family, and member owners are at the top. So they own Mountrail-Williams, they own Upper Missouri, and they own Basin Electric. So all 3 organizations are member owned. So it's a bottom-up organization. Members being normally think of at the bottom, but they're on the top here because they own everything. So Mountrail-Williams is a Class C distribution cooperative in our 3-tier structure that the Basin family has. We deliver power directly to our members' homes and businesses, as most people understand. The next cooperative in that structure is Upper Missouri Power Cooperative, and many of you probably haven't heard of Upper Missouri, but they are a Class A generation and transmission cooperative. They're based in Sidney, Montana, and they're made up of 6 distribution cooperatives from eastern Montana and 5 distribution cooperatives from western North Dakota. They have some transmission and substation assets. They don't have any generation assets. But they're governed by a board of 11 directors that one from each of their member cooperatives. And amongst those 11 directors, they select a director to sit on the Basin Electric Board and represent our area. So that's a little background on Upper Missouri Power Cooperative. And then there at the bottom, Basin Electric is our generation and transmission cooperative. I'm sure Todd will cover more about them, but they're owned by 140 different member cooperatives throughout a 9-state region. And they are managed by a board of 11 directors from those different member distribution cooperatives. So Mountrail-Williams is members who we serve electricity to, and they own Mountrail-Williams. They also own, a part of Upper Missouri and a part of Basin, and they have representation at all of these cooperatives. All three of these organizations are cooperatives, and that means their year-end margins are allocated back to their members. For example, in 2023, Mountrail-Williams returned $14.6 million in capital credits back to our members. And this year we returned $15.9 million back to our members. And it's just part of the cooperative advantage. So before we look at future growth, I think it helps to look at the past to understand how we got here. We do load forecasts every year. And typically we're looking at load forecasting 10 years into the future. So I wanted to take a look at the last 10 years before we look at the next 10 years. And on this graph here, I have two different metrics. We'll look first at peak demand, which is the blue line. Again, that's the maximum amount of power that we serve at any given time. And I have the annual peaks graphed here. This is the amount of power dictates really what we have to build our system to be able to serve, and also what Basin has to build in order to serve our members at that peak time of the year. So in 2015, our peak was about 365 megawatts, growing to 850 megawatts in 2024. That's about 133% increase, or about 10% a year over that time frame. Most of that growth during that time was oil and gas related, with the exception, I think notable exception in 2022 and 2023, you can see a little sharper increase. On top of the oil and gas load increases those years, we also had some crypto mining load that came onto our system then, and that's worth pointing out there. The other measure that I have graphed here is our plant value, and that's the green line on this graph. That's the value of all of our assets that we have, our distribution lines, our substations, transmission lines, everything that we need to serve our members is in that plant value numbers there. And that started out at $482 million in 2015, growing to $780 million in 2024, or a 62% increase over that time. And I put that on there just as an indication of the capital investment that our members have made in order to serve all the needs of the cooperative. And as you can see, this kind of growth, I mean, it's rapid, some pretty rapid growth to serve a growing industry. It takes a lot of investment and planning, but we're able to do it, and it was it's been a successful thing over those years. I want to keep in mind, this is just Mountrail-Williams' growth here. Our neighboring cooperatives, like I said, have a similar type growth, and Basin Electric has also made large investments to support this growth over that time. So now, looking into the future, and as I said, we do load forecasting every year. We look at the next 10 years. We're still finalizing our next load forecast right now. So I'm not going to share exact numbers with you. I'll probably generalize things a little more, but we are forecasting our power needs to increase considerably in the next 10 years. And we think they'll at least double again, like they did the last 10 years, probably a bit more than that in the next 10 years. The biggest part of the future growth in our forecast is still oil and gas. That makes up a majority of this year's forecast that we're working on. we see continued development in our area, whether it's new oil wells, future gas plants, compressor stations, and the other related infrastructure. We're seeing electrification of the industry, in areas that, traditionally weren't electric. So for example, we're seeing a lot of drilling rigs are now using grid power or electricity from the grid instead of diesel generators. And we expect that trend to continue in the industry in other areas. So for further electrification. So most of our growth, like I said, is still oil and gas. But there's a new sector that certainly is showing a lot of growth in our area, or indicating that we're going to see a lot of growth. And I'll generally call that the technology related loads. To steal a phrase from Todd, you'll hear him talk about that, and I think it's a good way to categorize it. But there's two distinct subcategories I guess I want to speak about individually. In the past, I used to just call them data centers, altogether, and I think that got confusing for people, and I think it's important to distinguish them. So I'll talk about each of them individually. So data centers, I'd say we don't have anything that I would consider a traditional data center on our system today. So we don't have any currently, but this is going to account for quite a bit of the growth that we have in our forecast as well, along with oil and gas. The customers at these data centers are traditional, these big tech companies we've all heard of usually. We use their products probably every day, or their services. The workloads that are being processed at these data centers are probably, mostly I'm hearing artificial intelligence, maybe the training for those models, or maybe some cloud computing workloads. Another thing to distinguish data centers maybe from the crypto mining is their construction. From what I'm understanding, I haven't seen these myself yet, but they're brick and mortar, tilt up precast wall type construction. They're fully enclosed, and they're cooled with HVAC systems, so they're not open to the outside air, which I think can make them maybe a quieter operation than some crypto mining facilities. So certainly a different impact on the area where they're at, from how I understand it. I often get asked, well, why are data centers interested in coming to North Dakota or to our area? And from what I'm hearing, a lot of it has to do with access to energy, whether it's the electric grid, our transmission and generation that we have available here. They see we've made a lot of investments. We have a lot of infrastructure, ability here. But beyond that, it's also our energy resources in the state. So for example, natural gas, there's a lot of it, an excess of it. And I think they see that as an opportunity to, future generation can be added here. And also wind resources are play into that a little bit too. But they know that they need dispatchable generation to keep these data centers running, and renewables only isn't going to cut it. The other part of why they're interested here, I think, is land availability. Traditionally, I think these have located on the coast, a lot of them on the East Coast. That Northern Virginia area is kind of a common area for data centers. I think they're running out of space and running out of power in those areas, so they're starting to look other places. And North Dakota's climate is also attractive to these facilities. Just being a cooler climate, you can cool these facilities a little more efficiently, and there's less risk for natural disasters like earthquakes and hurricanes. One thing to note about data centers is their demand for power is firm power. So they want power, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, which makes them, a little more challenging load to serve than crypto mining outfits, where they are willing to be price sensitive and turn off when you need them to. Data centers are going to be, expect power just like our residential and business customers do. So These loads are, for the data centers, are large. Typically in conversations that I've had with them, not all of these are, I want to be clear that these numbers I'm throwing out here aren't necessarily confirmed to come to our area, but I've talked with a lot of them, and they're usually interested in a few hundred megawatts minimum to 1,000 megawatts or a gigawatt is what they're looking for. So they're large loads, certainly, and probably the largest type of loads that we've ever had requested. So I can't share too many details, but there is active development in our area related to data centers. There's still a lot of work to do with the local government entities that these data centers need to work with them. But I think it's likely that we will see some of these in our area. The other category I've already talked about a little bit is cryptocurrency mining. We already have these on our system and throughout North Dakota. They exist to mine cryptocurrency, or typically Bitcoin. Most of the existing sites that I've seen and in our area have an open wall construction, and they cool with open air and fans, which we've seen can be produce some noise issues. So I think there are ways they can construct them with different cooling mechanisms, maybe liquid cooling that can be a little less impactful, but I haven't seen those myself. These are interruptible loads as opposed to the firm power needs of data centers, which makes them a little easier to serve from a power standpoint. They can turn off when the grid needs them to. So their impacts on the grid probably aren't quite face value of the load that they need on a day-to-day basis. They're large loads, but they're not typically as large as the data centers. Most requests I've seen for these are starting at a minimum of 2 megawatts up to a couple hundred megawatts. So kind of a category just a little bit less than the data centers. So we have some future growth in this area, but not nearly as much as we have forecasted for oil and gas and data centers. So, with these large loads and all these loads that I've talked about here, and it requires a lot of capital to serve and build this new transmission and generation. And there's a lot of things we got to be very careful about. We got to get the rates right on these to make sure that these large loads cover their appropriate share of costs. We need to make sure that we're careful with the timing of when we connect these to the grid to make sure that these load additions don't come before the needed transmission and generation is there to serve them, so that we make sure that we can continue serving our existing members reliably and our these new members reliably. But we've been faced with a rapidly expanding industry before in the oil and gas industry. And we didn't walk away from that challenge. We figured out how to do it. Basin Electric and the distribution cooperatives in this region have made huge investments in the area to serve that growth in the past 10, 15 years. Collectively, they've invested billions of dollars in the grid while keeping rates affordable. So we've done it, and I think we can do this. The size of these loads are a little bit bigger in one chunk, not a few megawatts at a time. There could be 100 megawatts at a time. So it is a different challenge in front of us. But I'm proud of the work that the cooperatives have done in the last 10, 15 years. And I think our cooperatives and our region and North Dakota are all better off because of it. So I think these new loads are a good opportunity, and we will solve these challenges. I want to you to keep in mind, this is just Mountrail-Williams' forecast and what we're seeing. Our neighbors are seeing similar things, but we're all a little different. Ultimately, all of the Basin Electric cooperatives are going to submit their forecast like we do every year to Basin Electric, and Basin uses all those as a basis for their resource planning and what they're going to build in order to keep ahead of us. So I think this is a good time to turn it over to Todd to hear about what Basin is currently building and what they've got going on and what their future plans look like to serve this type of growth. So thank you. And I'll turn it over to Todd.
Thanks, Alex. Just want to confirm you can see that first slide?
I can.
Okay, great. Thank you. We'll greatly appreciate the invitation today. If Alex and I are doing our jobs correctly, people only think about their electric service provider once a month when they pay the bill. One question that Alex and I get a lot when we say that we work for an electric cooperative is, well, what's the cooperative business model? And I think that Alex did a great job explaining the vertical nature of our relationship. So what I thought I would do was just zoom out for a minute and demonstrate by this map that electric cooperatives, this network isn't unique to North Dakota or South Dakota. It's entirely across the whole country. And if you look across the country, there are 895 electric cooperatives in the United States, and that's divided between wholesalers and retailers like Alex described. And I would describe Basin as the wholesaler and Alex and Mountrail-Williams as the retailer. The wholesalers in our business are known as generation and transmission cooperatives. So that's what Basin is. Across the country, there are just over 50 generation and transmission cooperatives. So that leaves approximately 840 electric distribution cooperatives that provide the last mile of line to our homes and businesses. As Alex described, just to remind you again, the generation transmission cooperatives are owned by their member distribution cooperatives, and then the distribution cooperatives are owned by their customers. With respect to Basin, Alex also referenced this number. We have 140 members. So we are 16% of Cooperative America in Basin system. And that makes us the largest generation and transmission cooperative by the numbers of members that we serve. So this slide looks and kind of zooms in a little bit and looks specifically at Basin's service territory. The retail footprint of Basin's distribution cooperatives is approximately 500,000 square miles. So that is 12% of the land of the free and the home of the brave. As measured by our retail footprint, Basin is the largest electric utility, not just generation and transmission cooperative, but the largest electric utility in the country by the size of our retail footprint. One way to think about Basin service territory is that we are the breadbasket and we are the power basket of the country. The states that we serve produce dominant shares of any number of agricultural, protein, and energy commodities. So this slide, you can see the footprint of our generation and transmission assets. We have about 2,500 square miles, or excuse me, 2,500 miles of transmission lines. And our generation fleet is diversified between approximately 35% coal, 15% natural gas, which will grow significantly over the next decade, 25% wind, and 4% hydro. And as Alex referenced, we are growing like crazy. This is a chart from a Wall Street Journal article back in November of 2023. And so what this looks at is the 10 years from 2013 to 2022. And it shows that North Dakota's electric consumption grew by 60%. And that is triple the rate of the next four highest growth states, which are Texas, Virginia, Oregon, and New Mexico. Now, just keep in mind, this is on a percentage basis. So North Dakota did start relative to these other states, probably other than New Mexico, on a relatively small basis, but still on a percentage basis, we have grown significantly. And I do think that the media organizations have done a public service really over the last 9 months, covering the U.S., the growth of electricity demand in the U.S. It's rare when the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, as well as the New York Times all get the story right. So I think here they've actually fulfilled their public service role in talking about this, because it's something that we're going to have to deal with on a local, state, and regional, and also across the country. It's an issue we're going to have to deal with. For North Dakota, this growth has obviously been driven by what we refer to as the Bakken Bonanza. Going forward, we expect this growth to continue with technology or data center loads contributing significantly. And Alex touched on those, covered them in a pretty comprehensive basis, and I'll just talk about them as we continue our discussion. So Upper Missouri is the intermediary cooperative that sits between Basin as the wholesaler and Mountrail-Williams as a retailer. And Upper Missouri's growth is reflective of the broader trend that we've talked about in North Dakota. This chart shows from 2009 through 2023, and Upper Missouri's unit sales, and we measure those in megawatt hours, but Upper Missouri's unit sales increased at 13%, just under 14% per year, from just under 2 million megawatt hour unit sales in 2009 to just under 14 million megawatt hour unit sales in 2023. So again, just under a 14% compound annual growth. And you look at that and you go, wow, that'd be great if my retirement account could grow at that rate for that long a period of time. To satisfy the growth that we've seen in our system here in North Dakota and the other 8 states that we serve, we have had a significant capital expenditure program. Focusing just in on North Dakota, the distribution cooperatives who serve Western North Dakota, and this, Alex showed the map that showed all the distribution cooperatives in the state. This just looks at the distribution cooperatives who serve the western portion of the state and have the Bakken area in their footprint. But those distribution cooperatives have invested $1.2 billion in property, plant, and equipment since 2013. Similarly, from 2010 to 2013, Basin has invested $645 million in generation within the Bakken footprint of our service territory. And from 2010 to 2023, Basin has invested another $450 million in transmission to enhance the reliability that's in the Bakken. So our capital expenditures, given the historic growth and then also the accelerated growth that Alex has referenced, our capital expenditures are accelerating. Over the next 5 years, we expect capital expenditures to be just over $5 billion. If you put that into context, We currently have $8.5 billion of assets on our balance sheet. So we're going to increase our balance sheet by more than 50% over the next, or before the end of the decade. Our strategic assumption at Basin is that the technology industry and the utility industry are on a collision course. And what I mean by that is if you think back to the turn of the century, you had, Google was probably 2 or 3 years old. Facebook didn't exist yet. Microsoft was selling us their product on CDs, and Amazon was only selling books. And if you look at the business models of these companies now, their business models are all based on cloud computing. And so what that means is that the electrons that Basin produces and Mountrail-Williams distributes, those electrons are the raw materials for these technology companies' business models. When I say they're on a collision course, you say, well, what are you going to do about it? And humbly, I can say that we don't know how this is going to play out. But the demand for electrons, as Alex has outlined, is going to continue to increase dramatically. Another way to think about this, and Alex talked about cost allocation. Basin currently has 3 million consumers at the end of our lines. And our peak load is roughly 5,100 megawatts a year. So when you think of our next 5 consumers, if they're going to be data centers from Google, Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, and Amazon, that 5,100 megawatt peak could double to 10,000 megawatts. And I'll tell you, if we had 5,000 megawatts of generation available today, they would take it. They would connect immediately. So the key question for utilities is, how are we going to allocate costs between the historical consumers that have financed the system, in Basin's case for almost, or for just over 60 years, and how are we going to allocate those costs between those historical customers and what could be 5 technology companies that double the size of our system? And there's some interesting math with that. Our current system of generation assets, the installed cost is just over $800 a kilowatt. When we're looking at building new generation, that new generation is going to, depending on what it is going to cost between $2,000 and $3,000 a kilowatt installed. So you're looking at a tripling of the cost to install new generation. The other thing that we need to keep in mind is that for us to plan, develop, engineer, permit, and build a power plant, that is a 7-year project. Where a data center, if Alex gave a data center the green light to connect to his system today, they're going to be up and running and consuming electrons in 2 or 3 years. So it takes us double that to build a power plant to serve those loads. So we do have a number of exciting projects underway to serve our growing load. Pioneer Generating Station Phase 4 is the 4th stage of the Pioneer facility that we began developing over a decade ago. And this is located just outside of Williston. Our budget for the plant is just over $800 million, and we expect final commercial operation in August of 2025. But that's actually going to come on in phases, and we expect a portion of that to phase in the April timeframe. We also have a number of large transmission projects to help bolster the reliability in the Bakken region. Leland Olds to Tandy is something that we refer to as the East Loop. It runs from our Leland Olds generating station up to Tandy. We call it the East Loop because it runs east around the lake. That one we haven't broken ground on. We're in the permitting phase, and but we hope that that's going to be completed in November of 2026. But I would imagine, just given some of the challenge that we're having with permitting and right of way, that it's going to take a little bit longer than that schedule. Roundup to Cummer Ridge is a 32.5-mile transmission project. It's got a $95 million budget. It was originally scheduled to come online in the spring of next year. We've made great progress with that. We expect that it's going to come in a little bit under budget, and we should actually electrify that line next month. So we're 5 or 6 months ahead of schedule there. And then Tandy and Wheelock to Saskatchewan is one of the later projects. We've just initially started the permitting and right-of-way work there, but that will actually be a power line that goes up and crosses the Canadian border. And that's, again, to help bring power in from the north to help us with reliability in the Bakken. Our strategy historically at Basin has been to capitalize on low-cost natural resources to fuel our generation fleet. And for the first 3 or 3.5 decades of our existence, that natural resource was coal. Over the last 15 years, we've capitalized on natural gas and wind. In relation to the transmission projects, it's important to remember, while these transmission projects will improve reliability in North Dakota, they also help us move the electrons that we produce here in North Dakota to the 8 other states that we serve throughout our service territory. Final project I'll talk about is a new baseload generation project that's going to be located north of the lake. We refer to that area as the Williston Load Pocket, and that's just the area that the load has grown in. This project is going to be anywhere from 700 to 1,400 megawatts. It'll be the largest generation project that Basin has developed since the 1980s. And if it's the full 1,400 megawatts, it will be the largest electric generating facility in the state of North Dakota. And it's to serve, again, the load growth that Alex and I have been talking about. And we expect the first phase of this project will be completed in the early 2030s. So let me just finish up. I know we want to leave some time for questions, but there are 4 things that an electric utility like Basin does. The first of that is to balance supply and demand. The second thing that we do is to mitigate risk in order to provide stable and affordable rates. The third thing that we do is that we communicate with stakeholders, which we're doing today. It's a great forum to do that. And then the final thing that we do, and it's really through a combination of the first 3 things, is hopefully we make everybody's lives just a little easier so they don't have to think, well, is the electricity going to come on when I flip the switch? I will say that with respect to balancing supply and demand, due to emerging technology loads on the demand side and the regulatory overreach from the EPA on the supply side, it is getting more challenging to balance that supply and demand as a generation and transmission cooperative. And then the second thing I mentioned was regulatory or was mitigating risk. And regulatory risk is the largest risk that we are currently mitigating. To combat this, we have paired our all of the above energy strategy with an all of the above legal strategy to push back on some of the regulations that the EPA is trying to impose, which will have significant impacts not only on our existing generation fleet, but it will also impact the costs that we serve and the way that we reliably serve our members like Mountrail-Williams. So sorry to end on a down note there with regulation and our concerns with respect to the EPA. But with that, I will open it up for questions.
Okay, well, thank you guys so much. I really enjoyed this presentation, and I hope all of you guys listening did as well. We do have some questions, if we could start out with that. One of the first questions is for Alex. The question is there a percentage demand from oil and gas versus data centers / crypto?
Ballpark right now, kind of what we have, the forecast we're working on, I'd say roughly 60% of our new load forecasted is oil and gas, and maybe 40% data center and crypto.
Okay, thank you. The next question is for Todd. It says, do you expect Basin's power generation sources will expand to include nuclear in the future?
I do. I don't think it is going to be in the next decade. And when I mentioned the electric utility industry and the technology industry being on a collision course, one way that that collision might be avoided is with the technology or data center companies actually building their own generation. And over the past year, especially, I would say that there has been a much closer relationship and association forged between the technology companies and nuclear companies. And you saw that with, there's a nuclear facility out on the Susquehanna River on the East Coast. That's the headwaters of the Chesapeake Bay. And that nuclear facility actually sold one of their data center locations to Amazon, and Amazon will take electricity directly from that nuclear facility. Then there have been, you can just Google technology industry and nuclear facilities, and you're going to see 4 or 5 headlines in the past month where they have paired up together. So I think that we will keep our eye on nuclear. The last nuclear project that was done in the United States went 2.5 times budget and 2.5 times cost. And if I remember correctly, the cost exceeded $30 billion. So it's something that you probably don't want to be first at. You want the providers to settle on technology and demonstrate a stable cost and efficient supply chains and the ability to build these things before you jump into nuclear. And the other thing that benefits us here in Northwest North Dakota is all the development that we've had around natural gas. We have a very healthy supply of natural gas, and we have very stable costs. So that's something that we would capitalize. We expect to continue to capitalize before taking the jump into nuclear.
Okay, thank you. Another question popped up, and this is great. You guys keep bringing them into the chat. It's working. The next question is, will the tech companies accept power from fossil fuels, specifically coal? And that's not assigned to anyone, so either one of you guys can answer. Just decide who wants to go first.
Yeah, I can take that first. I would say in conversations that we've had with companies like that, 2 and 3 years ago, maybe they weren't firsthand conversations. They were more industry, talking about, what the big tech companies are looking for. I would have said no. They weren't interested in that, or they wouldn't say it publicly. But now, here in the last year or two, as Mountrail-Williams has visited with people directly involved with these companies, I think that attitude is changing a little bit, and I think they're facing reality that if they want a firm load, like I described earlier, that's the only way it's going to happen is with fossil fuels, coal, natural gas. So I think they're probably not going to shout it from the rooftops and brag about it, but I think behind the scenes they're realists and they know it's needed.
Yeah, Alex is exactly right. And I'll just look at it from a different perspective. One, they already are being served by electrons produced by carbon resources, whether it's natural gas or coal. When the electrons get generated and flow across the power line, they don't go from Basin's generation plant to a specific user of Mountrail-Williams. They go really all over the region and all over the country. Second, if you think about the business models of those technology companies that I referenced earlier, their business models are really predicated on first user advantage and network effects. And what I mean by first user advantage is while Google wasn't the first internet search service provider, they had a good product and they got more and more people to use it. And so that created network effects where everyone Googled the internet. It's the same with Microsoft suite of products, whether it's Word, Excel, Outlook for email. It's everyone uses it. You create network effects and you create your own monopoly, if you will. I mean, if you look at the share that they have of their markets and respective technologies, they're dominant and they're like monopolies. So what that means is in order to have a first mover advantage, they're going to use the first electrons available to them. And I think the business and economic realities of their business models probably are running into a little bit the environmental and carbon-free goals that they set for themselves. And I think just from they also are understanding reliability a lot better, and they understand that you can't do all this with renewable generation.
So much. Another question that came up was how does carbon capture figure into future plans?
We didn't touch on that, and we could spend another hour on carbon capture. I think that Basin is the leading utility in the country and maybe the world on carbon capture. A lot of that is what we're doing at our subsidiary, Dakota Gasification. But we and partners have also spent $100 million at the Integrated Test Center at one of our coal facilities in Wyoming, and that's to study carbon capture. And then in North Dakota, you have 2 generating stations that have closely looked at carbon capture. Minn Kota has been looking at it for a decade or more. And I think carbon capture is a possibility, but right now the costs are probably a little bit prohibitive, and what might tip us over the edge are the mandates coming down from the EPA. But at the same time, it's incredibly expensive to put in place a carbon capture system on a power plant, whether it's natural gas or coal. And that's a second industrial complex. And that industrial complex is going to have its own challenges. Right now, The capacity factor of our coal fleet is about 85%, so they're available 85% of the time. With a new technology like carbon capture and being its own industrial process, you're probably looking at a 70 to 80% capacity factor at best. And so you marry that up with the capacity factor of the coal plant, and you're looking at something that's probably no better than 60% availability. So that makes the economics of the entire package of the coal fleet or the natural gas fleet and carbon capture more challenging.
Thank you. We have time for one last question. That question is availability of natural gas a reason to increase generation in Western North Dakota?
Absolutely. So it's a reference before our historical strategy with respect to fueling our fleet. When we built Leland Old Station outside of Beulah in the 1960s and 70s, the reason we did that was the access to low-cost mine mouth coal. And what we see now as we've extended that strategy to natural gas, we're not using mine mouth coal in the future for future generation, but we're using well mouth natural gas. And if you look around the country, North Dakota either has the cheapest or the second cheapest natural gas availability to us.
Okay. Well, with that, thank you to Todd and Alex for joining us. A question did pop up just right at the end of where people can go. And
yep, any unanswered questions will be sent to the presenters to be able to respond to you.
Thank you. And we want to thank so much to our sponsor, Mountrail-Williams Electric Cooperative. And thank you all for listening and engaging in a conversation on growth and development in the Bakken region. We hope you all have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.